Hello and welcome. My name is Cosme with Tiny House Cribs, and today we have a unique story. We have an interview here with Libertarian candidate Anthony Welty for the position of Washington State Insurance Commissioner, and we're going to be talking about the tiny house bills that are currently at the state Senate. And we're going to be talking about why people support and why people oppose and what our viewpoints are towards these bills. Anthony, thank you for joining us.
No, I'm excited to chat with you. Somebody that's kind of on the front lines on the tiny house movement, man. It's cool seeing what's going on these days. I'm glad it's making some progress, it seems. So I'm excited to chat with you.
Sure, absolutely. Well, thanks for being here. So tell us a little bit about yourself. Who are you? For those people who don't know you, what do you represent? And then what is your candidacy here that you're running for?
Yeah, I appreciate that. So Anthony Welty, I'm born and raised here in Washington. I'm running for Washington State Insurance Commissioner, actually, which is a position that most people don't realize that everybody in Washington gets to vote on, and it affects everybody's life day to day. Insurance on tiny houses, insurance on your cars, insurance on your regular house, insurance on your mansion if you're lucky enough to have it.
Sure.
This is a single topic that bridges the gap across all political parties because it truly affects everybody equally. So I've been excited to chat with people across all political spectrums about individual topics. Even this tiny house thing, a lot of people don't realize how hard it is to insure a tiny house. So I'm excited for some of the legislation that's coming because I think it'll make insurance a little easier. So my wife and I are big fans of the tiny house movement. We're actually working on a project ourselves right now.
Sure.
We doled it down a little bit. It's no longer a traditional tiny house. It's more of a trailer with a tiny house remodel. But it's been a lot of fun. We're actually working on it this afternoon. My wife's out in the trailer right now.
Sure, that's fantastic. And as I go around and talking to potential tiny house owners, one of the biggest concerns is our government doesn't approve of this. And I'm just excited to hear that you and your wife, as potential political influencers, working on your own individual tiny house project. So that's definitely exciting. So let's dive in here. Hopefully our audience can actually see. So the biggest reason why we're here is for this. So the state of Washington has officially announced, I thought it was 3, but it's actually 4 House bills that directly impact the tiny house community. So these House bills are 5382, SB 5383, SB 5384, and SB 1206. So in the next slide here, it basically SB 5382 specifically addresses tiny homes as accessory dwelling units. So what is an accessory dwelling unit? For those people who don't know, an accessory dwelling unit is you have your residential property, you have a primary house, which is usually the main house. And then if your lot allows, you can actually have a guest house, or they call it a mother-in-law suite, or like a backyard cottage per se. So you can do that today, and but the hurdle was, can a tiny house on wheels be classified as an accessory dwelling unit? The other one is SB 5383, which is helps define at a state level what tiny houses are. And number 3 is SB 5383, which will hopefully clearly define what a tiny house community is or are, and where can these communities be located throughout the state. And number 4 is SB 1206, which will define and differentiate what park models are, tiny homes are, and manufactured homes are. Those are 3 different categories of movable structures. So those are, as you're seeing here on the screen, these are the direct links here. Definitely encourage you to pause throughout this recording and go through these direct bills. You can personally yourself, if you're a Washingtonian, you can click on these bills and support it, oppose it, or you can even put neutral um, on these topics. So let's see here. Let's going back here to our libertarian candidate here, Anthony. Why do you support these tiny house bills, or what do you think stands out?
For me, I think that the easier we can make living, the better it is for everybody. We're seeing a huge increase in what it costs to build a traditional home. We're seeing a huge increase in homelessness. We're seeing, you know, 30-year-olds are kind of boomeranging back to their parents because it's so hard to buy a house. And on the end of that, we're seeing retirees having to boomerang back to living with their children. And that's all, a lot of that's okay, but a lot of it, as far as where you live is fine if it's, personal choice that you're making.
Sure.
But unfortunately, a lot of folks are being kind of forced into those situations because of the current political climate we're in, and construction climate that we're in. So I think, for the most part, these bills just kind of streamline things a little bit. As a libertarian, I'm not one for a lot of regulations and very little to none in respect to property owners. So I think these are great. I kind of looked through them, although the SB 1206, I hadn't heard that one yet. So I'll have to pull up the fine print there and make sure it looks good to me. But all in all, I think this just streamlines things and will make life a little easier for people that want to build non-traditional homes. And I'm all for that.
Great, fantastic. Well, I agree with you with very little government involvement. What we do need, what we believe here at Tiny House Cribs is we need a clear definition of what a tiny house is and what it is not. Clearly, right now, we do have several RCWs that define what a park model is, what a manufactured home is, what a recreational vehicle is, and what it is not, and how it cannot be used. For example, I'm gonna quote here the current laws here that pertain somewhat to what a tiny house is. So RCW 59.20.030 subsection 14 defines a park model, which is a means as a recreational vehicle intended for permanent or semi-permanent installation and is used as a primary residence. And then furthermore, RCW 59.20.030 subsection 17 talks about recreational vehicles and how they are a means of a travel trailer, motorhome, trunk camper, or a camping trailer that is primarily designed and used as a temporary living quarters. And I'm not going to read the whole thing. It's a little bit long, but it does conclude that it is not occupied as a primary residence and is not immobilized or permanently affixed to a mobile home lot. So the last thing I wanted to share with the audience here on these current state laws is RCW 9A.04.110, which defines a dwelling. So a dwelling is what we want our lawmakers to define tiny homes as being. A dwelling under this RCW is a building or structure, though movable or temporary, or a portion thereof which is used or ordinarily used by a person for lodging. Now, that's a lot of legal jargon, but in essence, a dwelling, you're basically, it's like the home we live in. A dwelling can be an apartment, somewhere that we live in full time, or it can be a single family home. It can be an accessory dwelling unit. And manufactured home is considered a dwelling. A modular home, something built in a factory, that is then placed on a property, on a piece of residential land, that is also considered a dwelling. A recreational vehicle is not considered a dwelling, therefore you cannot live in it on a full-time basis. And I'm sure there's a lot of philosophies on why that is. It's not safe for the full-time, for the kind of a full-time family, for whatever, for the well-being of the person's inside. I understand all that. So all we want the government to do is clearly define what a tiny house is. And there's a lot of subsections of what a tiny house is. There's a tiny house on a permanent foundation, that's fully legal right now. Anybody in the state of Washington, or quite frankly across the United States, can build a tiny house on a permanent foundation. under Appendix Q, tiny houses in the International Residential Code. So that's great and dandy for those of you in the audience who want to pursue investing in that project on your properties. You can do so. The biggest hurdle for our industry is the tiny homes on wheels and the tiny house boats. I know in the Seattle area and the western area, there's a lot of people that are living full time in their boats and their vessels. The legal term is a vessel. So there's all that going on because, once again, the struggle is real for a lot of working class people. For the average person, just can't afford the current housing opportunity. So we have to find a way um, to have shelter, and that's one of the basic necessities of humans is shelter. So shelter and food are the two biggest things that we are necessities. So as far as, since you're running for insurance commissioner, some folks have said, is there insurance companies that will insure tiny homes? So I can share a little bit about our experience and what we've talked about, but I wanted to see what you would think if you were to be insurance commissioner for the state of Washington. So currently, right now, you can insure a tiny house if it is licensed as a park model, or if it's licensed and as a manufactured home, it would just apply to those insurance. It does not make it eligible for homeowners insurance because it's not affixed to real estate, right? So there is insurance options available depending on how the tiny home on wheels was created. If it's a tiny house on a permanent foundation, then it just applies to homeowners insurance. So what are your thoughts in respect to insurance coverage for tiny homes?
I want to cut as much red tape as possible. I want to make it easy for you, the property owner, and, for argument's sake, me, the insurance company, to do business as simply as possible and to have flexible options. One size fits all approaches rarely work, especially in something as unique as tiny houses, right? Where you see all kinds of off the wall, things and ways people are doing things. So if we can, at the same time, like, streamline things, so that the language is more clear, it'll make underwriting easier and more accurate to the risk. And if underwriting is easier and the risk is more accurate, then the rates that are being charged will be more appropriate. And when you do that, the insurance companies are going to want to do more business. And that's good. When you invest, 20, 30, 60, 80, $100,000 in a tiny house, you want to make sure your investment is protected and protected properly. And right now, there's some, kind of lesser known companies, so to speak, that will do a variety of types of insurance on tiny houses, or, tiny house trailers. But it gets to be a little difficult to find those companies. So hopefully with some of the language that we're talking about today, we'll streamline it through a regulatory process so that a traditional, State Farm, Allstate, Progressive, will start coming out with products, specifically designed for tiny house livers. And I think that's incredible. I think insurance is a great tool to make sure that you protect your assets. And right now, I don't know that that's easily done. So hopefully this will help make things a little better.
Sure, absolutely. And for those potential insurance companies or agents that might be watching this broadcast, there might be thinking, what are the potential risks if we were to insure a tiny house dweller? Well, our experience has been that there's many different types of lifestyles of tiny house dwellers. For example, I talk to a lot of career hoppers, those seasonal professional workers. On your guys' side of the mountains, on the west side of the mountains, we see a lot of tech professionals, software engineers, hardware engineers, Amazon, Facebook, Google, Microsoft, all these executives or people who've gotten those professions. They're jumping around from area to area, company to company, to try to figure out what their passion is or what company they want to really align themselves with. So that requires a lot of housing moving decisions. So those folks who want to do a tiny house on wheels, that's the reason why they're buying a tiny house on wheels. They want something that's homey, that's environmental, and that is mobile. They don't want to engage in those situations where it's a 6 month lease, a 1 month lease here, and a apartment complex that's $2,000 a month, right? So they're wanting that mobility, that freedom to say, if it doesn't work out for Google, I'm going to go to Microsoft, or if it doesn't work out for Microsoft, I'm going to go to Amazon, or I want to start my own, tech company or whatever it is, somewhere else. And they can do that the day they make the decision versus saying, oh, I have this 6 month lease. I'm legally liable to pay for 6 months of this housing rental, or 1 year, depending on where they are. If they get month to month, great. But most landlords, they usually get you in a 6 months, 1 year lease. Um, so when in respect to the agents, there's those folks who are moving all the time. And then there's the other percentage of folks who are acquiring, either building themselves or buying a tiny house from an official company, and they are permanently placing it where they actually live and where they intend to retire. And these can be millennials, Generation X, this can be senior citizens. There's all different age groups, but people just want to live there. They want to call that place home, and they want to do it through a tiny house. So there's definitely difference in respect to insuring somebody who's mobile, who intends to move 2 or 3 times out of the year, versus this is going to be my home. I'm permanent. This is going to be my primary residence. This is where I'm going to live at. This is where I'm going to work and worship and, build community. I'm going to stay right here. So there's a difference in risk when it comes to insurance companies insuring different types of tiny house dwellers. What are your thoughts on that?
That's where flexibility comes into key. And right now, the insurance climate is so burdensome with the excess rules and regulations that really handcuff insurance companies. At times that's self-created because they're trying to protect their own interests. And at other times, it's the government who is just literally behind the times. They're not up to date on new technology. They're not up to date on new ideas. And that's, that's okay. But that's our job to help show people and educate them that this is a healthy lifestyle. This is a safe living environment. And as long as you're not hurting anybody, that we should find ways to help encourage it. So, I could see the future of insurance. A lot of cutting edge insurance, is going to be hybrid policies. A policy that when you're moving it switches to more of a trailer style where you have comprehensive collision coverage for the trailer. But when you park it, it's more of a flat replacement cost coverage for wind, fire, and hail. So I'd love to see those innovative policies come out. It can be a little bit more accurate to what the risk is, right?
Sure.
While you're towing it down the road, it is an entirely different risk, same value, but different risk than when you're living in it and cooking dinner and maybe the smoke detector's fire alarm is out. So sure. I think that there are easy ways we can do this. And from the insurance angle, it's just going to take a little bit of time, I think, to get more data. Once the insurance companies get data, they're going to see that there's a couple % profit margin there, and they're going to want their chunk of the pie. And, first couple hands that are raised, or, there's going to be a little bit of a gold rush on this. And I want to make it as easy as possible for both sides. I want the insurance company to be happy and have a product that they can stand behind, and that you can buy one that, you and your family can be comfortable with.
Sure. Absolutely. And what recently I had a conversation with a potential customer who saying something to the effect of, there's people been living in RVs for 10, 15 plus years full time. So the question is, when the conversation of life safety and fire prevention, let's say this full-time RV family, all of a sudden something happens in the kitchen where fire is ignited, and all of a sudden they obviously evacuate because it's a small structure, so they end up evacuating the RV, and they happen to have RV insurance. So I understand, and just my mindset as a business owner is, wow, how much liability you're insuring somebody as an RV type of insurance, but somebody is using it as a dwelling. This fire occurred, all of a sudden the whole RV is basically totaled in the vehicle world. It's a total loss, um, right? So it's basically the insurance company is at a disadvantage now because you're insuring this
Yep.
with the understanding that the person was using it as a recreational vehicle, and all of a sudden this is a place they lived in for 10 years, and this is what they call home. So it's not homeowners insurance, it's RV insurance. So I understand that maybe some insurance carriers are troubled with that. And I think, as we move on and clearly define what a tiny house is, hopefully insurance carriers can create a product like you're saying, and be able to ask the right questions. Is this going to be your home, or is it going to be a seasonal uh, living situation? So seasonal and full-time and permanent be would fall under a different premium or a different product. So hopefully my insurance agents and carriers watching this broadcast, um, can start figuring that out, because tiny houses will become law. There will be a clear definition in the state of Washington and, quite frankly, across the United States. So insurance companies need to step up and need to start sitting down and saying, okay, we need to start creating insurance products that meet the needs of tiny house dwellers, whether seasonal dwellers or full-time dwellers. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, it's a dangerous situation right now. Twofold. Um, if the RV owner, calls up their insurance carrier, maybe they have a truck policy, a car and a truck on an auto insurance policy, and like, I bought a 25-foot fifth wheel, I need to add it to my policy. Insurance agent says, great, okay, let's go put on the policy. That'll be $30 a month, and everybody goes home happy, right? Well, the issue with that is, in the letter of the law, if you are permanently living in it, that is excluded from the majority of trailer insurance. And if there's a claim filed and the claims adjuster comes out, assesses the damage, and asks a couple questions, and it turns out the person's living in it, well, now all of a sudden they have grounds to deny a claim. Okay. Some of that responsibility comes on the insurance agent to ask the right questions, and they should be held accountable for that if they're not doing their jobs properly. That's what they get paid for, right?
Sure.
They get paid to ask those questions, and I think there's some culpability there. There's also responsibility on the property owner that they need to read the small print in their policies and realize what is and isn't covered. And there's a lot of a disconnect there, because there are thousands and thousands and thousands of people here just in Washington that are living in trailers that aren't properly insured. And that's not because they're trying to cut corners per se, or even that the insurance agents are trying to cut corners. It's just a topic that isn't talked about a lot anymore. I've got a coworker. So I work in the insurance field now. I work property and casualty insurance. I do car insurance, home insurance all day long. One of my coworkers, her mother and father live in RV parks. I would be willing to bet, if I looked at their policy, it's probably not covered, right? And I care about this woman and her family. And so it's concerning that if something tragic happened, they could be out, $30,000, $40,000, $50,000, and that's their retirement money. So I think as we bring this conversation more to the forefront, both the insurance angle and the tiny house thing, and we make it more commonplace, it will be something that is more easily talked about and is more run-of-the-mill. Because when you call to add a car to your car insurance policy, the conversation is really simple. You need full coverage. Do you have a loan on it? Things of that nature. And when it comes to trailers, I don't think most insurance companies and agents realize how common it is that somebody's actually living in it. So I think just highlighting this as a viable living option will increase awareness. And when there's more awareness, we can have more intelligent conversation. And when we have more intelligent conversation, everything kind of moves forward. I mean, that's progress. So I think this conversation we're having here today is excellent. One of the reasons why I'm running for office right now as a libertarian is to show a more open-mindedness to things that would typically be considered abnormal. And anything that's abnormal typically is hard to accommodate in respect to government. my wife and I are a little out there. We're building this little trailer ourselves, and ours is going to be more mobile than it will be stationary. But we're doing that because we want to take it around the state and show people that, hey, you can do this. If you want this lifestyle, there are ways to create it for yourself, and I want to help empower that. I want to help encourage it. Um, you mentioned Amazon and Google employees, and I think tiny houses are an incredible cutting edge type of housing for those folks. But I also want to show people that are on the fringes that simply don't have two, three, four, $500,000 that qualify for a loan through Wells Fargo. There are ways that you can live reasonably without having to break the bank. Um, Homelessness is on the rise in this state. I mean, we're seeing a crisis. It's gone up tenfold over the last 10 years. Um, a couple of these bills. What is it? I think I can't remember which bill number it is. I think it's is it 5383 that allows a little bit more flexibility and defines what a tiny house village is essentially.
Yeah, it's SB 5384 that talks about
84.
tiny house communities and villages.
So if let's say right now we're building lots of affordable housing units, right? Well, or rather, we're not building a lot of them, but a lot of people want them. If somebody like yourself wanted to buy a plot of land for let's say $1 million, right? And you're like, man, where can I turn a profit on this and provide for my family, but also provide for others because I care about my community, right? And here on the west side of the state, I live in Marysville, just outside of Seattle. There's a lot of talk about sound transit right now, and the train, right, coming through Seattle into Linwood. And there's going to be a lot of need for new housing up in that area. And how incredible would it be if a couple people or one business owner bought a big plot of land and built an entire development of tiny houses that sold for 80 grand, right? It had your running water, your toilet, your 2-bedroom loft, right? You could put your family in there, and maybe you don't own a car because you commute via train that's walking distance away, and you work in downtown Seattle where you take a bus, right? So you don't need a 4-bedroom house with a 2-car detached garage. So I think 5384, as you said, cleans up the language that would allow that type of project to happen. And of course, it's going to take investors and people that want to do that type of stuff. But right now, you basically can't. So even if somebody had the money and had all the brilliant ideas and had the capital and had the builders and had the buyers, they couldn't build that type of living situation. And these bills, which I fully support, will clean up the language to make that a possibility. And maybe it works, maybe it doesn't, but that's what freedom is. Freedom doesn't guarantee an outcome, but it's the flexibility and the freedom to choose how we want to live. If that gives me an alternative living situation that's happy for my family, then I should have that right. You should have that right to sell it to me.
Sure, absolutely. And in closing here, we're at 10:34 right now a.m. Saturday, February 16th right now. In closing comments here, I just want to say that Tiny House Cribs appreciates your support to pass tiny house laws here. That number one just clearly defines what tiny houses are. We support tiny houses as accessory dwelling units. We support tiny houses in manufactured home communities, formerly known as mobile home communities. We also support tiny house. Just the definition of tiny house, what that is. I think that's the most important thing. The less the regulations to be able to build these, the less cost we as business owners can sell these for. I know people, when they think about tiny houses, they think affordable, but when the government gets more and more involved and creates more and more of a due process with working with them, then unfortunately we as tiny house companies, we have to increase the prices to even break even from all the investment that we've made to create this beautiful units that once again supposed to be affordable. So I think as a business owner, what's going to keep these affordable is number one, the government fully legalizing the definition of these units, and then number two, from there, the less involvement, the better for the community, and that's how we are going to be able to keep these units as affordable as we can.
Well, I think something that's important to note on that, and if I can interject for a second,
Sure.
is the more red tape it is, the people that have money and can afford things, they're going to have money and can afford that regardless of how much red tape it is.
Sure.
What the red tape typically hurts is the marginalized minority communities, right? The poor people that are on the verge of homelessness already,
Sure,
or can't qualify for an apartment potentially, right? So, and those people are either going to live in one of those houses illegally anyways.
sure.
So the regulation's not keeping them safe. What it's doing is it's criminalizing their lifestyle, or they're going to live on the street. So the regulation is either going, it's not going to, it doesn't accomplish what it's intended to begin with. And I think a lot of these things are started in good faith, right? We want people to be safe. We don't want people's houses burning down. We don't want people's houses catching other houses on fire. But we need to realize what the true outcome is, and what the unintended consequences are. And this conversation is great. So I'm looking forward to traveling the state over the next couple of years. My election is not till 2020. It is a statewide election. I am on the ballot already. I'm running against a 40-year career politician. And I want to take a different route than what he's done in the past. I just want to make life a little simpler.
Yeah. Great, fantastic. So, how can people learn more about you? Do you have a website? Do you have a Facebook channel? How can people learn more about your candidacy for insurance commissioner?
Well, so first off, I'm a normal guy. I'm not I'm not some big time politician. I'm a normal guy with a normal family that makes a normal wage. My phone number is 425-299-0724. You can text me, you can call me. If my kid's not climbing on me, I got a 3.5-year-old,
Sure.
I'll pick up the phone. If I can't pick up the phone, I'll call you after I put him to bed.
Sure.
You can text me, call me anytime. I got a Facebook page, Anthony Welty, WELTI, Libertarian for Insurance Commissioner, or if you like hashtags, it's hashtag Welty, WELTI, the number 4, WA, so Welty 4 WA. And I got a website, anthonywelty.com. So, I encourage these conversations, whether you fully agree with my ideas or not. Let's talk. Let's move the ball forward, right? Enough stagnation here. I want to be accessible. So reach out to me anytime, please.
Okay, fantastic. Well, thank you, Anthony, for being with us here on this beautiful Saturday. We got quite a bit of snow on this side. Do you guys get any snow on your side?
I got about a foot and a half.
A foot and a half. Wow.
It shut the whole West Coast down, and it's a little insane. But we're coming out the end of it here. I like the snow. So.
Sure, absolutely. Okay, Anthony. Well, thank you for being on this interview, and we wish you much success.
No, thank you for what you're doing, because the tiny house movement is something that I'm personally excited about outside of politics, and it's because I'm like a lot of people. We make an average wage, and it's difficult to afford housing right now. So we're excited to consider that as an option. And websites like yours that I stumbled onto almost a year ago, I showed it to my wife. She's like, "Oh my God, that's awesome!" And the more of those we can find, the better. So I want to thank you for what you're doing, because it matters.
Great. Well, thank you so much. We'll keep in touch. All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.